And we go now to the governor, Roy Cooper of North Carolina, a battleground state. He joins us from Raleigh. Good morning to you, Governor.
Good morning, Margaret. Good morning.
Vice President Harris will be in your state Thursday. We know this is a consequential week. Debates can be catastrophic. They can be inconsequential. Do you anticipate the average North Carolinian is open to persuasion or even watching what happens on that debate stage this week?
There's no question about it. It's close here in North Carolina. It always is. This was Biden-Harris's closest loss in 2020, only 1.3%. So the fact that Kamala Harris, as Vice President of the United States, has been to North Carolina 17 times shows that she cares about our state. She knows that we are in play, and she knows that if she wins North Carolina, she is the next president of the United States, because Trump has no other pathway.
Is it winning, or is it just reducing the amount by which they lose rural voters? You have a very large rural population in your state.
And, you know, things that the Biden-Harris administration has done has helped our rural population. I've been able to expand Medicaid here in North Carolina. That's helped working rural North Carolinians. We're getting high-speed internet all across our state. That's something that people are beginning to find out about. And she's got a plan. She's got a plan to lower costs for North Carolinians, particularly in this child care arena, drug pricing. We're excited about the economic plan that she has, and I think North Carolinians will respond to it.
Well, I want to ask you more about some of that, because our latest CBS polling shows it is a very, very tight race, and it is the issue of economy and inflation that is weighing the most on voters. So we're going to talk about that in a few minutes when we take this break, and we'll come back to finish it with you, Governor. Stay with us. Welcome back to Face the Nation. We continue our conversation with the Democratic governor of North Carolina, Roy Cooper. Governor, our CBS polling shows this is still a competitive race for Donald Trump, largely because of those voters who just don't think they are better off financially right now. Their incomes are not keeping up with inflation. This is especially true among non-college and white and working class voters. How did Democrats change this perception?
Well, I think that same poll, Margaret, said that people had more trust in Kamala Harris to help the middle class. And as she spends time getting out her economic plan of shifting the tax burden here, we need to make sure that billionaires and corporations pay their fair share, and that everyday people and small businesses get the tax benefits. As she talks about her child care plan and providing child care tax credits, you've got Donald Trump, who clearly doesn't understand the problem. You got J.D. Vance, who's saying, well, you should get your grandparents or your aunts or uncles to look after children. Completely clueless. When we continue to get this information out to the American public and to people here in North Carolina, that Kamala Harris has an economic plan that's going to help lower the cost for everyday people, that's going to help families thrive, that is going to protect women's reproductive freedom. I think at the end of the day, that's going to be what works here.
Well, you got a short period of time to do that, sir, in this election. One of the things that we did hear about from the vice president this past week was her endorsement of a less dramatic increase in the capital gains tax rate than what Joe Biden had proposed. This is a tax on assets owned for more than a year on households bringing in over $1 million in income. Now, the vice president hasn't said whether she supports Biden's proposal to tax unrealized gains. That's getting a lot of focus from Republicans. I'm just wondering, though, is this announcement and positioning really just an attempt to appear more moderate, to appear more pro-business? Is it just a political ploy?
I think what Kamala Harris found out in the period of time, the 3.5+ years that she's been vice president, that you have to achieve consensus to get things done. And that's exactly what she's been able to do. Overall, what she wants to do is to shift the burden here. Clearly, the billionaires are not paying their fair share. And we've got to figure out a way to make sure that we can get them to do that while easing the burden on the middle class. And the way you do that is to try to find consensus, because as you know, it's very tough to get legislation through both the House and the Senate. And that will continue to be a challenge, but she's shown that she's got the ability to help do that. Tim Walz was in the Congress, so he's got the ability to help push legislation that helps shift this balance. So I'm excited about the potential for them being president and vice president of the United States.
Well, and having to work with Congress. I want to ask you about guns. We saw this horrific shooting in Georgia this past week, and the father of that shooter is facing second-degree murder and other charges because he gave his son that AR-15 style weapon that was used. You're a former state attorney general, and I wonder what you think of this precedent of prosecuting parents. Do you think it's effective in dissuading gun violence?
I think we have to do everything we can to reduce gun violence, particularly gun violence in our schools. And I think that that is appropriate. But we also know that these military-style assault weapons are being used by lots of people. They can kill multiple people. We don't need to have them on the streets. Look, you can't be tough on crime if you're weak on gun laws. Vice President Harris and I here in North Carolina, as a gun owner, as the supporter of the Second Amendment, support stronger background checks, red flag laws, and banning these military-style assault weapons. We shouldn't even have them available for people to use in these mass murders that are occurring. I'm tired of seeing texts from children in a school telling their parents that they're afraid and that they love them. We cannot normalize this. J.D. Vance says this is just a fact of life. No, it's not.
He said
it should not.
He said he regrets that it's become a fact of life. But you do agree then with prosecuting parents, is what I understand from what you just said there.
Look, if the evidence is there, yes.
Okay.
That we need to make sure that people are responsible. If you're giving a 14-year-old, and I don't know what all of the evidence is here. Obviously, you got to wait until the court. But if you're giving a 14-year-old, particularly one who's said that they are involved or like mass shootings, and you're giving that 14-year-old an AR-15 as a birthday present, that is a problem.
Would you serve perhaps as Attorney General in a future Harris administration?
Look, I'm gonna be involved in some kind of public service. I'm running through the tape as governor. It's a lot for me to do. Going to work to make sure that we elect Kamala Harris as president, elect Democrats in North Carolina. Then we'll see.
All right, Governor, thank you for your time. We'll be right back. We're back with the chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, Republican Michael McCaul of Texas. Congressman, good morning.
Thanks for having me.
I have a lot to get to with you. I want to quickly ask you about what we heard from the Justice Department on Friday in regard to this massive Russian scheme to influence the upcoming election. Back in the spring, you took some heat after you said Russian propaganda had infected a good chunk of your party's base, and you blamed right-wing media. It seems like you're being vindicated here, but Donald Trump said yesterday at a rally, he seemed to dismiss all of it. I don't know what it is with poor Russia. Do you have any reason to doubt what the Justice Department and intelligence community said?
Well, Russia's been trying to do this, many years. So has China. So has Iran, for that matter. And it's intensified. And I think I didn't blame anybody for it. I blame Russia for putting disinformation in the United States that does get picked up by people unwittingly in many cases. I think in this particular case, the owners of the company knew they were dealing with a Russian disinformation campaign, and if that's true, should be indicted. But it's a problem with China. They're involved in my election, just like Nikki talked about her election. Iran, under indictment there. Yeah. So, I mean, this is Russia, China, Iran, North Korea.
I want to put that aside for a minute and delve into your investigation. You've been on this program a number of times over the past 3 years investigating the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan. Your report comes out tomorrow. Explain the timing, because it's in election season, a day before the presidential debate. Your ranking member colleague is saying that this is politically motivated and they didn't even get a copy of the report. Why is that?
They're getting a copy of the report today, as is Secretary Blinken, as is the White House.
Is this politics, though, in an election year?
No, it's taken me 2 years to get to this point because of the obstruction. I've had to serve subpoena after subpoena, move to compel, threaten to, hold the secretary in contempt to get information like after action reports, all these documents, testimonies that we finally got to. Why is it important right now, Margaret? Because the foreign policy is at stake. What happened after Afghanistan impacted the world. Why? Because Putin responded by invading Ukraine 2 months after Afghanistan fell. Chairman Xi, Putin made an unholy alliance in Beijing, threatening the Pacific now. And then the Ayatollah reared his ugly head in the Middle East. And we're seeing this finally, this is really important. The Bagram prisons unleashed thousands of ISIS-K prisoners that went to the Khorasan region. 8 of those, and that's who we know about, have been detained by the FBI in the United States that got in through the southwest border. This is a failed foreign policy colliding with a failed border policy all at the same time. I think it's very relevant. Lastly, my investigation will go well after the election.
Where does it go next?
We have a lot of unanswered questions regarding the DOD. What happened on the ground? Why were these snipers left basically unprotected? Where was the surveillance equipment that was videotaping? Why don't we have one video of the suicide bomber going off?
Well, there's a GoPro camera that you document that did film it, and there was a Reaper drone, I believe, that started filming 3 minutes after the explosion. But are you implying here some kind of conspiracy? I mean, you can't be saying that the Pentagon wanted...
I'm not a conspiracy guy. I'm a prosecutor. This was done very methodically. I wasn't looking for press clippings. I did this facts, evidence. I didn't reach any conclusions. But the fact is, typically, they do multi-attacks at the same time. We know that...
The ISIS suicide bombers who attacked at Abbey Gate.
That's their modus operandi. That's how they conduct these things. We do know that all the video was destroyed after. What we know from the Marines on the ground is that shots were coming from the Taliban. And some of the Marines were actually hit by bullets, according to their testimony. It's the best evidence we have because the videos were destroyed.
Well, General McKenzie, in a briefing in 2022, said that that was ball bearings that came from the suicide bombers' explosion, and there was some dispute over the bullets.
And that very well may be the case.
But I guess why I'm asking is there have been multiple CENTCOM investigations, a State Department investigation. Do you not accept the findings of those investigations?
If it wasn't for my investigation, CENTCOM never would have reopened an investigation. It was this, very brave sniper that came forward, Tyler Vargas Andrews. They came forward and said, I had the suicide bomber in my sights. I asked for permission to engage. Permission was denied.
CENTCOM denies that happened.
They denied it happened. I want to know where they got the picture. Is that a picture of the bomber at the site at HKIA? Or where do they get that picture? We just don't know.
HKIA being the airport. I want to ask you, though, 11 Marines, 1 sailor and 1 soldier lost their lives at Abbey Gate when that suicide bomber detonated. On Tuesday, the Speaker of the House is presenting an award to the family members of the fallen. That's also debate day. I think you would agree all Gold Star families need to be respected in this country. More than 2,400 Americans were killed in Afghanistan, 45 combat deaths under Donald Trump. Why aren't all of them being honored? Why only these 13?
Well, this was one of the deadliest days in Afghanistan. It could have been prevented if the State Department did its job by law and executed the plan of evacuation. They did not do that until the day the Taliban invaded and overran Kabul. By that time, it was too late. They left these 13 servicemen and women hanging out to dry, 170 Afghans killed, 45 service members and Afghans injured as a result of the, I'd say, moral negligence on the part of the administration, allowing this to happen. I think it's totally appropriate to honor them. It was never done with the intention of it being on the same date as the debate. That was not a coordinated effort.
Really?
To my knowledge, it was not.
General McKenzie, who was the CENTCOM commander in 2021, said the Trump-era Doha agreement was one of the worst negotiating mistakes ever made by the United States. It was the operational mechanism that killed Afghanistan, that destroyed the government of Afghanistan. Did you identify mistakes by the Trump administration?
Well, we identified, as all colleagues had. The mistake here with
The negotiator.
with Doha was the fact that he negotiates with the Taliban and leaves out the Afghan government.
Right.
That was a slap in the face to them, and it was not good for morale. Having said that, the Taliban—
That was the Trump policy.
Yeah, and the Taliban was in violation of Doha. That's why Trump left 2,500 troops. When President Biden came into office, it was very clear, go to zero. In fact, his press guy said, it's immaterial. Doha agreement's immaterial to us going to zero.
Yeah.
We're getting the hell out of there, irrespective of conditions on the ground.
Both presidents agreed with getting out. It was the military that opposed.
Well, the Trump administration had
How it was
conditions. I don't think we can speculate. One thing's for sure, Biden had an agenda on day one to get out.
I have so many more questions for you, sir, but I'm told we're out of time and we have to leave it there. Mike McCaul, chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. We'll be back in a moment.
Thanks, Mark.
Joining us now is the ranking member of the House Intelligence Committee, Democrat Jim Himes of Connecticut. Congressman, good morning to you.
Thanks for having me, Margaret.
A lot I want to get to with you, but I did want to offer you a chance to respond, if you care to Congressman McCaul. I know you and most Democrats supported President Biden's decision to withdraw from Afghanistan, although I think you'd agree the exit was one of the darkest days of his presidency to date. What do you make of the Republican argument that this reflects on Vice President Harris's abilities to serve as commander-in-chief?
Well, you're right, Margaret, when you say that that was a very dark day. Anytime we lose service members, it's a very dark day. And the 13 that we lost at Abbey Gate are rightly remembered. And you know how you remember them best? You remember, as you pointed out in your interview with Chairman McCaul, that there were also almost 2,500 others killed in Afghanistan over a 20-year period. What Chairman McCaul is going to offer to the American people, though, is, and you said it right, it's going to be about Vice President Harris. It is a politicized, cherry-picked report designed to do one thing, not shed light on a tragedy, which, by the way, I would support 100%. And by the way, let's also look at the 20 years and the 4 presidents that doubled down on Afghanistan policy. It is going to be a nakedly partisan campaign thing. Chairman McCaul said it at the end there. You know, what the military issues that he was raising, you know, he didn't mention the fact that when he said that President Biden came with an agenda to withdraw from Afghanistan, President Biden did not come with an agenda. He came with a binding agreement negotiated by President Trump, who also released 5,000 Taliban. And by the way, and here's the key point that didn't come up, who also left President Biden with 2,500 troops in Afghanistan.
Yes.
Margaret, when we were attacked on January 6th on the Capitol, in the days after, we had more than 2,500 National Guardsmen guarding the Capitol. That's the tools, and that's the agreement that Donald Trump left President Biden with.
And there were thousands more NATO troops as well. So the 2,500 is a little bit misleading, but let's put that aside. Just to honor our allies there, that surely you know about. I want to ask you about the ISIS threat. On Friday, it was disclosed that a 20-year-old ISIS supporter was apprehended 12 miles from the U.S.-Canada border. The FBI said the individual was a Pakistani citizen residing in Canada who was planning a mass shooting attack in New York City on or around October 7th to kill as many Jews as possible. Do you have any insight into whether this individual was self-radicalized? Was he directed? What is the threat picture here?
Yeah, you know, we've been out of session for some time, so it's been a little while since I've had a classified briefing, so I probably can't specifically answer the question about that individual. What I can tell you is 2 things. Number one, ISIS is dedicated, as is, by the way, Iran and any number of other groups, to trying to strike the United States. That is a fact, and that is why it is so important, the work of the intelligence community and the FBI to stop that stuff. And they're pretty good at that. You saw the arrests, of course, of the 8 people who were affiliated with terrorist groups. They're very good at what they do. It's very hard for them to be perfect, but it's also important that we not over-exaggerate the threat here. We have come a very long way. I'm actually just back from a 9/11 ceremony on the 23rd anniversary, celebrating or memorializing that hideous attack. The intelligence community, the military, the FBI have come a long way since 9/11, and as a consequence, we learn about these things, and hopefully we'll be in a position to obstruct as many of them as possible.
Fair point. I want to switch gears if I can, you are right to remind us all that we are coming up on that 9/11 anniversary and memorial to all of those. On the question of election interference, we got these disclosures from the intelligence community this week and the Justice Department. This was a sophisticated scheme to interfere in the election by setting up fake news sites, paying $10 million to a Tennessee-based company to launder Moscow's propaganda. They used podcasters, they used well-known personalities on YouTube to trick American voters in swing states, according to the DOJ. How effective has this campaign been?
Well, that's a really hard question to answer, Margaret, because that gets into the question of, gosh, are these crazy right-wing websites and right-wing journalists who evidently their money came from Russia, are they actually having an impact on the election? It's sort of hard to believe in a 50-50 election that's going to be played out in sort of 4 or 5 states that it's not going to have some impact on the margin, which is why 2 things are really important. Number one, back to the FBI, back to our intelligence community, they need to double down on identifying, naming and shaming those countries that are doing this, and Chairman McCaul was right. It's primarily Russia. Russia has really pulled out all the stops, but it's also China, it's also Iran. There's even some other countries that are thinking about it. But Margaret, I feel very passionately about this. They can only succeed if American citizens hand over their autonomy, their sovereignty, their critical thinking abilities to the Russians or to the Chinese. And so what I always tell my constituents, if you're looking at some random social media site and you are getting hotter and hotter and angrier, and people who disagree with you are not just the opposition, but they're traitors, you know what you're doing? You are being manipulated. And it may just be by Facebook's algorithms, but there's some chance it might actually be the Kremlin or the Chinese or the Iranians who are manipulating you. And if you're going to be manipulated that easily, guess what? This country is going to get the democracy that we deserve.
Vladimir Putin publicly said he was endorsing Vice President Harris this past week. U.S. intelligence, though, assesses that it is Donald Trump that is, in fact, Moscow's preferred candidate. Do you know whether Putin is directing this particular campaign?
Well, I will tell you that super sensitive things like meddling in U.S. elections, you know the nature of the Kremlin and of Putin and of his autocracy. Nothing serious happens in Russia without Vladimir Putin signing off on it. So precisely how involved he is an open question. But believe me, yes, he would. And look, the whole, I'm endorsing Harris thing. Yeah. All you need to do is listen to the way the 2 candidates talk about Russia and Ukraine, and you can develop a pretty independent sense of what Putin would like to see happen on Election Day.
You said earlier this week that banks are required to research their clients. When you were being asked about this case of a Tennessee-based company that CBS is reporting is Tenet Media that was being manipulated by the Russians, what is the principle you're asking to be applied here?
Well, I guess, and I'm not talking about legal compulsion necessarily here, although banks are required to know their customers. It's nice to imagine that, massive social media platforms or massive media platforms like Tenet might actually do a little research to try to figure out where their money is coming from. Yeah. Frankly, the people who look at their media have a right to know where that money comes from. So, at a minimum, check this stuff out because you may not want to be complicit in a Kremlin operation.
Congressman Himes, thank you for your insight. We'll be right back. That's it for us today. Thank you for watching. Until next week, for Face the Nation, I'm Margaret Brennan.